Hey, hey, everybody. Good morning. At least good morning from Colorado Springs, where I'm at. Feel free to jump in the chat, say hi. Welcome to another question and answer live stream. I'm always so excited for these, so thanks to everybody who joins in and brings really, really awesome questions. We've had some really cool things we've talked about over the last few months, from Beethoven and Satie and Hanon, and I just even remembered one earlier today. I remembered one earlier today from one of our first sessions about cryptocurrency versus taking piano lessons. That was a really fun one to talk about. So you can feel free to ask absolutely anything. And we'll get started. So I have one really, really big announcement that I want to kick today off with, and I'm going to be talking more and more about this on the channel as we go forward. But I have spent the last few weeks working very hard filming a new online course. And it kind of combines a lot of stuff that I do into just one really big project that I hope a lot of people can learn from. And so I know it's the end of September, but this new course is going to present 5 new arrangements of Christmas music that I've written. So if you don't already know about my other channel, I have another channel. It's just called Szczepanek that I do a lot of arranging on. I've probably arranged almost 90 pieces over there, so you can go and check that out. There's always a link in the description to that. And so the course is going to teach those 5 arrangements, but it's going to teach them in ways that you can apply all of the concepts to pretty much anything, any piece of music you'll play ever. So it'll be a great way to kind of get ready for the holidays and get in the holiday spirit, and that'll be really cool. But then everything that you learn from it, you can take and you can really, my hope is you can use it in everything that you play from then on. So I'll keep you posted about more and more of that stuff. I see more and more people joining in, so hello and welcome. Drop your name in the chat, tell us where you're from, and feel free to just drop a question. I'm assuming you're here because you have one, maybe, or maybe you just want to see what other people's questions are. And in the meantime, if you don't have a question, let us know what time it is where you are and what you're drinking. I always have my coffee here. That's great. So until I see a question from somebody, I thought I would respond to a little bit of something that I saw as I was scrolling Facebook in the the vast amounts of free time that I have. Hey, Cyrus and Aurelius, it's great to see you. Thanks for tuning in. There was a question on Facebook from, I don't know, this is probably about a week ago, and it was on one of the music groups over there. And it was about scales in general and how to keep them fresh and how to keep them, maybe look forward to practicing them instead of dreading practicing them. So I thought I would kick today off until we've got some questions that come in about specific stuff. I'll kick today off by talking a little bit about that. So first off, I just want to respond to a couple things that are online and all over the place, talking about how unimportant scales are. And I think that's it's a risky place to teach from. Because I think, at least, this is my opinion, scales are the foundation for just about everything that we work on. Whether it's pop music or classical music or jazz music, especially jazz music. That's like the number one thing when I talk to jazz players and jazz professors, people that do it professionally, they basically say, know all of your scales, know all of your modes. And that's like one of the most important things you can know. So scales, we know we don't like to really work on them, but here's a couple ideas that you might want to throw into your own practicing. So let's start with some of the basic ones and we'll work up from there. How about that? Okay. Let's take B major because it's one of my favorites. And let's just start with a simple way that I always talk about teaching scales to my students. Hey, Jose, good to see you. So simple way, we just practice scales and accelerations, and that helps us build up speed. It's not so much thinking about the notes. We've got to know the notes pretty well, but we start in eighth notes, hands in parallel. So the click would be like this. Whoops. And then we get down to the bottom of the scale, and we go straight into triplets for 3 octaves. And then we get to the bottom and go straight into 16ths. Same tempo. Etc. So you can do that all the way up and down any scale. So I call that accelerations. It kind of is It's a little bit based off of what I saw in violin performance studios when I was in undergrad in music. Violinists regularly practice. Of course, they'll practice that a lot faster. You can take whatever tempo works for you. Eighth notes should feel easy, and they kind of help us get established and feel the key and feel out where we are. Triplets are always a great practice because playing in triplets is usually something that doesn't come super easily to a lot of musicians. And then the 16th notes, now we've had 2 run-throughs of a scale before we challenge ourselves playing a little bit on the fast side of what we're shooting for. So I always like doing that. That's one of my preferred methods of playing scales. Okay, here's something else. We can play simply different articulations in the different hands. So if we take B major again, simplest opposites would be playing legato in one and staccato in the other. So if I play legato in my left and staccato in my right, again, you could do that in accelerations if you want to. You can always add and build on all of this stuff if you so desire. We can flip the hands around, play legato with the right. Right? We could mix up the articulations. Maybe we could slur every 2 notes. Let's start with that. That's kind of, there's a slur and it's also a little bit of an accent and a release. Let's go further with that idea of accent versus non-accented. We could, without creating the slur, we could simply play accents every other note. I'm doing that detached. We could do it legato. We could not do it every other note. It could be every 4th note. So that's another cool way we can keep things interesting. One of the more challenging ones now is going to be if we're going to play, let's play triplets in one hand and eighths in the other. So triplets in the right hand to start with, eighths in the left. And then when we finish one iteration of that, 2 octaves in the left, 3 octaves in the right, we'll line up at the top of each scale respectively. And we'd go back down. We can always flip the hands, but if we flip the hands and we do the faster articulation in the left, be sure and add at least an octave apart for the right, 2 octaves apart, sorry. So if we play triplets in the left, and again, once we reach the top of the scale, the hands actually line up, and then we can go back down. Some of the more musical ways. So that's all practicing articulation and a little bit of rhythmic practice, especially that 2 against 3, which can be tricky. More musical ways we can practice. It would never be a bad idea to practice making crescendos and decrescendos over the course of your scale. So that time I did a crescendo ascending, a decrescendo descending. There will never be a time when that really doesn't need work. I don't think anybody will ever be at a level that doesn't need a lot of focus and concentration, because crescendos over a lot of notes and over a long phrase, they're very difficult to make, right? So we can also do the opposite though. We could play contrary to what our brain kind of wants to do, and that'll be a different kind of challenge. We can ascend, but decrescendo. So we need to start forte. I should do 3. I feel like I could have done that one better. But then that's challenging our brain to kind of think the opposite way that it's used to. We're used to crescendoing as we ascend and decrescendoing as we descend. So we can flip that around. And of course, we can add all of this and we can play different articulations while we work on dynamics. We could play things in shorter bursts, or let's say if we're working on a scale in 4 octaves, we could crescendo the first one, decrescendo the second, crescendo the third, decrescendo the fourth. So that's another way. All ways that we can just keep things a little bit fresher. At least working on crescendos and decrescendos, it feels kind of like we're turning the scale into a phrase. At least there's direction, and it's not just a bunch of kind of hammering the notes away. Scales, yeah. I don't think I ever, ironically, I don't ever get tired of talking about scales and even arpeggios, because when I look at a piece of repertoire, I see almost everything has a scale or an arpeggio in it, or some kind of chord shape. And a lot of the time, really, I think a lot of the time, we can apply scale fingering to what we're working on. It might not be exactly the fingering you've worked on in a particular key. We might have a phrase that's in B major, and it has a scale type passage. While we might not put our third finger on D sharp in the middle of the music, we're still probably going to be learning, or we're going to be needing to learn in that passage thumb crosses, finger crosses, exactly the same way as if we played scales. So being familiar with that and being familiar with all of them is really important because I just see every day that I practice and every time I learn a new piece of music, to me, the score just lights up with like scale here, chord shape here, interval of this here, or this is what this looks like. And those are all things that I use to help me sight read something. So I don't have to go note by note and kind of count things out or things like that. I have these big patterns that I'm used to playing, feeling in the fingers, used to seeing on paper, and that translates really well. Now, the further we leave, let's say, traditional classical music, and if we get into more contemporary classical music, late mid-20th century, 21st century stuff, there are still going to be scales in there. Composers definitely use those as a tool to write from. But they're going to be a little bit trickier to see because they're probably not going to simply be major and minor scales. They're going to be based on other things. They might be octatonic scales. They might be other modal scales. They might be a scale that the composer themselves has created. That's a really, really popular thing. Well, it was a really popular thing. I don't know if it still is. In like mid-20th century music, a composer to create their own set of diatonic pitches, their own scale. And then as a performer, my job is to find that out. So at least if we're not playing music like that, we know that the typical stuff that we go through and that we practice, our usual major and minor scales, that's what Bach used, that's what Beethoven used, that's what Mozart used, and Haydn, and Chopin and Liszt, and speaking of all of that, I think it's really interesting how Bach was so almost experimental, and he pushed the harmonic boundaries so far. When I hear Bach, I almost hear jazz. And I hear very, very developed, like romantic style writing because of the chromaticism and the voice leading and all of the diminished harmonies and even augmented harmonies. And that as soon as we leave Bach and we progress further, let's just say the next big composer is Beethoven, or Mozart. Let's say the next big composer is Mozart. There are plenty of others to talk about. All of a sudden, the harmonic language kind of gets smaller in a sense, which I've always found super interesting. That Bach is so complex and it's so difficult to analyze harmonically. And then Mozart's brilliant in a completely different way. But harmonically, we have harmonies that extend for measures and measures and measures at a time, instead of changing like every beat like they do in Bach a lot of times. Hey, Rodrigo. Rodrigo writes, between scales, chord shapes, cadences, and arpeggios, which one do you consider the most important to practice? That's a great, great question. Oh, man, if I had to pick only one, I would still pick scales. If I had to pick only one. Let's see, if I were to rank them in order of what I think most important would be, most important to still important, but less important. I think I'd go scales. Hey, Alexander. I'd go scales, and then... Oh, man, that depends. I think I'd go scales, arpeggios, chord shapes, cadences. Chord shapes because we can use those to continue to explore the cadence patterns. Cadence patterns, they start developing our sense of chord shape, which is really great, but they don't continue to lead us further beyond, especially if we just do 1-4, 1-5-1 or 5-7. If we don't go beyond that, then we're only learning those particular shapes, and that's kind of limiting. But we do need to know those for all of our keys. I think that's important, and be able to expand on that and so on and so on. So, and I guess I could further give that a caveat, Rodrigo, and say that it depends on what style of music you're studying and where you are in your progression, I think. I think I would always put scales first, but if we're interested in doing a lot of composition, or if we're interested in doing arranging, or playing pop music, or playing film music that's been arranged, we're probably going to skip some of the arpeggio stuff, or that's going to get put further away, and we're going to jump right into chord shapes, scales and chord shapes. So Rodrigo, the way I answered that the first time was for a classical player, I think, for sure. Scales, arpeggios, chord shapes, and then cadences. Because if we use arpeggios well, and not just as technical practice, we can still read chord shapes in there. So I'll go over to C for a second. You know, if we got our standard C arpeggio, there's still a chord shape that we're transitioning through. So there's a link there. And then if we practice our arpeggios in inversions, there's a different kind of chord shape there that if we can recognize that, and I think a lot of pianists when they practice, they don't recognize where that's going, and they think we have this series of notes and we're practicing for mostly technique's sake. And both scales and arpeggios, they're important for that, but they're also so important if we recognize the harmonic landscape that we're actually traveling through. And arpeggios can teach us a tremendous amount, especially if we do them in inversion. They can teach us a tremendous amount about chord shape as well. And they can teach us how to read. For example, if we're reading an arpeggio off the page, we're reading it horizontally, right, over time. But it's a great, great skill if you can learn how to take that horizontal information and stack it, because harmony is built stacked, and that's how we analyze harmony, is built stacked. So if we can kind of condense notes over from being horizontal and line them all up vertically in our head, even sometimes when we play things, we can have such a great understanding of the music and of harmony, and it's a huge help in sight reading, I find. So there's, I think, ways that people don't usually talk about practicing arpeggios that are really, really important, because it gets our brain involved in a different kind of way than simply going through and executing it, which I think is what technical practice usually comes down to for most people. Alexander, hey Alexander, he says, have you had an opportunity to think about ways to do piano exercises when exercises like Hanon cause pain? Alexander, I remember your comment that you made. First and foremost, I just have to say that I'm not a doctor or a physical therapist. And I would really, really recommend talking to someone with that kind of profession first. Even better if you can find one that's also a musician, but if that doesn't happen, that's the first place I would go, because I can diagnose some things that are wrong with playing by seeing and by talking with somebody. But if there's something underlying, like what we've talked about together, I would like a whole lot more information about what it does inside the body before I'm really comfortable giving a suggestion about that. Because I really don't want to guide you in the wrong direction or in an unhealthy direction. So yeah, Alexander, you wrote in again. Do you believe that even when performed correctly, certain exercises are not suitable for everyone, and that different people need different approaches? I think there are definitely going to be exercises that are easier for some and more difficult for others. And as pianists, we're trying to build enough of a technique that we can accomplish all of them. Definitely all of them without any pain. For sure, without any pain. So the number one place, so your physical therapist is recommending you stop completely. Yes, that's sad, but if that's the healthiest thing, let's talk through that a little bit more. But none of us want you to injure yourself or hurt yourself or cause discomfort. That is never the reason for playing music, and music becomes so much less enjoyable if that's happening in our body. We can't think about the music we're creating. We can't enjoy the process of learning things. So, okay. The primary places that I see problems that cause pain for people, for pianists, are founded in tension that we carry. Now, I guess, Alexander, here's a question for you. What kind of other daily activities cause a similar type of pain? And are there any activities that you do that are repeated, similar to what we do at the piano? At the piano, we perform a lot of repeated motions with our fingers and with our body. Especially when we're practicing something, we can end up spending a lot of time doing the same actions, performing them over and over again. And some people are definitely more prone to, I'm just going to call them an overuse injury. I know that's not exactly what we're talking about, but an overuse injury where we simply don't let the body rest enough to get rid of even if we're not playing with tension, there can be overuse simply from like the tendons gliding back and forth over the same bone area and through the same passages, like in the wrist and in the knuckles. And the tendons can actually, like the sheath around the tendons can get inflamed, it can get torn. And even if we're playing really healthily, that can happen. Yes, Rodrigo says maybe the pain comes from too much tension in hands and muscles. So that's why I asked Alexander if there are other activities during the day that cause that. Because if there are, and there are similar ones, yes, and Jose, if it's faulty technique, it'll return when you start playing. That is absolutely true. So if we can find, if there are other activities, though, that cause pain in a similar way or in a similar place, then it might not necessarily be fully linked to piano playing. There might be a component, and there might be something that is adversely affecting what we're feeling and what we're causing in the mechanism. So similar to, there are no other activities that cause this pain. Okay, so then, Alexander, I would definitely say that we probably have tension in our playing somewhere in the mechanism, and that could be probably from between the shoulder and down through the arm into the hand. Alexander, I would love it. I know I've mentioned this before to you. I would love it if you sent in a video, even if it's not to share publicly. Right, yes, I remember that, Alexander. I would love to see what you're doing. So even if it's not a public thing, I'm happy to help out and help diagnose. But it's really hard to know where the tension is happening or where the problem in the technique lies, only talking about pain. Yes. So Rodrigo says, unfortunately, many therapists tend to tell us to stop doing things when they cause pain instead of trying to understand and address the cause. Yeah. That's true. So I think both of you are correct in that there are probably a great many ways that we can continue to play the piano healthily and not experience the pain. I don't know any pianists, other pianists or professional pianists personally that have reactive arthritis. I do know pianists that have had arthritis, and it kind of, these are professionals too, and it can flare up on different days, and they can still play through it, but it's not comfortable, and they're not doing anything wrong. I mean, they are complete professionals, concert pianists. sometimes there isn't an internal thing that we can change that prevents it. But Alexander, I would go back and I would say, please send in a video. It could be anything, playing scales. It could be playing a piece that you're working on in one of your lesson books. It could be any of those. Without being able to see you, the first thing that I would be looking for is too much holding on in the fingertips and in the fingers themselves from the big knuckle down. That is something that I see causes a lot of pain for different people. So Alexander says, I could point you to some specific material. Let me ask Jose, actually, because Jose also, you probably have some experience with this. So I don't know of any specific material offhand, other than really studying the Taubman approach, and there are many, many videos online about playing like that, and it's a way that I teach, and it's also a way that, in fact, the hand exercises that you're working on that are continuing to cause pain, where we're practicing the specific gestures from Hahn and Faber, those are exercises that should be eliminating pain and should be eliminating tension. So other than watching, and I know that through the Taubman Institute, there are videos, and I think it's of Edna Golansky teaching Taubman technique, and they're pretty expensive, but you can order like a whole DVD set, and learn a lot about the approach like that. Now, beyond that, if the hand and gestures that you're working are still causing pain, Alexander, where in the hand is it and where in the arm is it? Is it, if it's here, like across the top of the hand, at least, or if it starts there, I would definitely say that we're holding on too much with the fingers, and that we're probably too focused on keeping curved fingers, and we're kind of afraid of depressing the key. So we're kind of holding everything up. And then even if we add in the wrist motion that those gestures are working on, that can actually, if we're holding on too much in the fingers, the wrist motion might even exacerbate the problem. The pain is concentrated in the joints. What joints in particular? Like in the knuckles? Or in the wrist itself? Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, gosh. On the fingers and on the back of the hand. Okay, that's helpful. Not in the wrist. If you can clarify that, that'll be a big help. Because we don't have muscles in the hand that we're using. The fingers are all connected through tendons. I really think that the main culprit, and especially why this is happening at the piano and not with other activities that you're doing, is because there's too much gripping and we're pulling too much. And that can manifest in other places, but the primary place that I see it manifest in students is in pain in the fingers and in the top of the hand. Now, that can be exacerbated, and this is what I was saying before, it can be exacerbated if we're attempting to add other motions through that, and then we're continuing to grip and hold on. We can actually probably make the pain worse because we're twisting and doing other things with the mechanism and putting extra strain on the areas that are already under tension. I would go back, play things very, very slowly. If you're going to work on those hand and exercises, let's actually, you know what, let's just go to a 5-finger position, just in C major on the white keys. And we're going to work on simply playing and releasing a note. Maybe start with any one you want to. Maybe the 3rd finger. Can we play without lifting fingers off the keys? Can we play just from the key down and not hold anything? So let's say even you can give yourself this test. How can we move? Thanks, Jose. I really appreciate it. Can we move things freely back and forth with no tension? Are all of the rest of the fingers free while we play a single note and hold it? And when we play that note, make sure we're not lifting to articulate any of the fingers. And once that note is played, we shouldn't be feeling any residual from the attack of the note. So start softly, because that's going to generate the least force, and hopefully generate, if we are generating tension through playing, it's going to generate the least amount. And then hold one finger there, and we can do just some slight wiggles back and forth and moving the mechanism around. Nothing big, nothing like that yet. Okay? But each finger attack just from the key top down. Maybe even don't even try 4 and 5 yet. Let's just use the strong fingers, 1, 2, and 3, because we're trying to isolate if there's any hold in the fingers themselves. And 4 and 5. Oh gosh. Rodrigo, Dakyani exercises are great, but I'm actually going to disagree for this particular case, because Dakyani it can cause a whole lot of, those exercises are really, a lot of them are based around holding notes down. Actually, it's crazy, but I have the book right here on the piano. Oh, thank you, Alexander. I really appreciate that. So if we just open up to the first Dakyani exercise, this is great. If I just take the right hand, I'm supposed to hold 1, 2, and 5, and then alternate between 3 and 4, and 3 and 4. Now, I have this book because I worked on some of these with my teacher that rebuilt my technique, but when I was in my teen years. But the principle behind them, they're trying to work on finger independence, and doing that, especially in Alexander's case and without the guide of an in-person teacher, that's extremely dangerous, because holding pitches and playing others because we can't let go and we have to ground the hand somewhere, they're great for learning how to build finger independence and how to continue to release. But if we don't know how to release first, those are going to be, they could be more harmful than good. They are good exercises, and it's ironic that I even have them out on the piano right now. But I would not recommend those for Alexander, at least not until he finds out if he can play single notes and relieve the tension and stop the redness and the swelling from happening. So that's why just single pitches and play from the key face, I guess, the top of the key. Just play straight down and in, and keep it really simple. You could even do it in a variety of positions. If you continue to want to work on hand positions or things that are like scales, you could take 1, 2, and 3 in any particular key, and that way you're still challenging your mind and learning some new things. We could play it in B major. But really focusing on from the key down only, and making sure that once the note sounds, there's absolutely nothing else that we're holding on to keep that note depressed. So that's why the little wiggles, but nothing big, because if we are holding on to anything, then the big motions can exacerbate a problem. Oh, Rodrigo. Sorry, Rodrigo. I don't know who you're responding to, but I'm glad you cleared that up. Thanks. So, Alexander, try that out and come back and see us again. And, I mean, honestly, if you can bring some to a physical therapist, bring some of these very small motions, like what we just talked about. Ask them, and you can even demonstrate it simply on like a tabletop or on the palm of your hand. The palm or the back of your hand. You can, then you can see what their comments are on the direction of the activity and if they know anything else. Based on what they see and what they can respond to. And I'd encourage you to send in a video clip and just let me know in the email if I can share it publicly or if you just want to keep it between us. And I'm totally fine with that, and I'm happy to help out. Danny's here. Hey, Danny, I think this is the first stream you've tuned into here. Danny, I've known Danny through comments on my other YouTube channel for, I guess, the past year, huh? So Danny, I know he's a big fan of music. Danny, you play some instruments? Do you play the piano? I can't remember. Let us know what instruments you play. How long can you play? He asks, how long can you play without any pain or tension in hands and forearms? In theory, if you have good positioning, you should never feel pain. That's true. You might feel, look, we're working muscles and we're working the body. So there's a reason why, like, when you see concert pianists play, they are sometimes sweating and they're working really, really hard. They don't feel any pain. So they could play all day. And we have stories about, yes, Jose, absolutely what Jose just said about Taubman technique, and that pain is a very, very bad signal. Oh, nice, Danny. I didn't know you played piano. Oh, no, you piano and guitar are your favorite to listen to, but you play the trumpet. Okay. So any professional musician should be able to play as many hours as they would like to without any pain or tension in the forearms or in the hands or any part of the mechanism. And if we have tension or things like that, that's a signal, just like what Jose said. Even if it's not painful yet, if there's tension, that's a signal that we're doing something wrong and we need to work on releasing that. In my own playing, to be completely, open and transparent with everybody, I generally have to work the most on playing octaves really fast, and playing especially left-hand passage work really, really quickly. There is a passage in the third movement of Beethoven's Les Adieux Sonata that drives me bonkers. And with my right hand, it's a similar thing. It happens at both hands at different times. And with my right hand, it takes some practice and I can get it. And with my left hand, it's the same passage. And it's like 30-second notes. And the pulse is already lickety-split. And every time I get to that point, if I'm bringing the piece back, I have to go and work it so slow and work it in groupings and do every practice technique that I'm aware of to get it under control again. And sometimes if I'm playing the piece and it's been a couple days since I've tackled it, I have to really go back and practice it hard. I put hard in quotes because we should never feel like we're working really hard at playing the piano, but it takes a lot of mental focus and knowing how to shift things around in practice time. JG, hey, I'm going to come back to your question in a second, especially because you're in class. Thanks for tuning in. I always appreciate it. Let us know what you're studying, JG, because I think last time you said you're in like waveform class. Are you studying engineering or physics? Danny, you wrote back in after your concert. So I played at NAU, Northern Arizona University, earlier this year, and I played a full program it was a collaborative program, but on the program was Rhapsody in Blue, the full 17 and a half minute piece, along with, 60-ish minutes of other stuff. I was absolutely fine after the show, and for sure the next day, yeah. I could have played another concert. Walking off, I could have walked back on. I mean, now the mental capacity and the physical stamina is another thing. But if we're just talking about like playing, physical stamina, let me rephrase that actually, because it's been a long time since I've done this, but I did have a point in my life where I practiced 6 to 8 hours a day. And that builds certain types of stamina, right? But I don't like to think about stamina in like the hands or the arms. For me, it always felt more like stamina in the shoulders and in the back, the big muscles that we need because we need to keep good posture, we need to keep sitting correctly. That's what would get tired out for me. So barring needing to play 6 or 8 hours, which obviously in a performance, I mean, unless you're playing John Cage or something, or Philip Glass, who wrote the piece that's 8 hours long or whatever, the one that, you know, people buy tickets and they fall asleep in the concert hall. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But barring something like that, and usually those performances, pianists actually trade off during the performance. So, but yeah, no, I've never had a problem, at least, I mean, since I've been a professional musician. That definitely used to be a problem when I had technique issues and when I was studying and when my teacher completely rebuilt everything. I couldn't get through, and in fact, I injured myself, which is part of the reason I'm so passionate about helping others now. I injured myself playing only practicing about an hour to an hour and a half a day because I was holding on to so much tension. And then I had to stop playing for a good 2 months or so to let things heal. And I had this massive, nasty cyst in my left wrist, and I didn't want any surgeon going in there or anything. So it's still there, and if it flares up, I know that I'm doing something very, very wrong, and I need to stop immediately. Let me jump back through the comments here. Danny, thanks. Good to see you. Thanks for that question, and feel free to keep chiming in, please. So JG has a question about revolutionary etude. Let me quickly hit Jose really quick. He says, from experience, when pain registers, the movements have been incorrect for a while. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't become painful until we've kind of destroyed a part of the body that we need. And then when that component is gone, then we really feel how incorrect it is. So I absolutely agree with that. Tobin would say building endurance is an obnoxious concept at the piano. I agree with that. Because if we're truly playing from a point of relaxation and a point of ease, yeah, we don't have to build anything. We just have to be able to sit there. If we can sit there for as long as we need to, then we should be able to do the rest. And something else, the book, The Art, I think it's called The Art of Piano Playing by George Kochevsky. He talks about how even a baby, a small child, maybe not a baby, but a child that's 3 years old, 4 years old, has all of the strength necessary to play anything on the piano. And it's a matter of developing coordination and neurological connection. Okay, let me jump back into, let's see. JG's question was about revolutionary etude. Some problems playing the run with the left and the right hand together. JG, I would practice in groupings, first of all. I don't think I have revolutionary etude on my iPad here. I have none of the etudes on my iPad. I do have the book close by, though. Hold on a second. I'm just going to grab it off the bookshelf. It's right there. Okay. All right. You know what, JG? There was a great, I don't like sending people off the channel, but there was a great video put out about Chopin etudes on Tone Based Piano's YouTube page. And And there was even some practice tips about the revolutionary etude. I can't remember the lady who presented it. She did a phenomenal job presenting the ideas, and I would definitely refer you to that video. And let me just type it in the comments here in the chat. And she goes over a lot of things that I'd basically be regurgitating here. But the primary way that I would practice, I've never played this before, so. So I'm assuming you're talking about that phrase in particular, like bar 4. The groupings, there's already groupings that are kind of printed here for you because of the stress marks, not necessarily accents. But I would take things in groupings, varying rhythm, and doing a little bit of articulation differences. Things like that, and then vary it to the second note. And then obviously do it with the other hand as well. Do hands together through these groupings if possible. I would go through every iteration of 16th note, leaving a pause on each one. Broaden the groups over a course of maybe 6 or 8 pitches and work on pausing in different places, allowing your hands some time to breathe. Yeah. One of the other things that you can try, and this is something that the tone-based video goes into in kind of great depth, is repeating pitches, repeating notes on the same pitch. I kind of even like doing that. I kind of like doing that with a little bit of a rebound kind of feeling. So I might play the first one and do it with both hands. So I'm giving a little bit of an extra accent to the primary pitch. You don't have to do a group of 3 repeats or like triplets. It could just be 2. So JG, I haven't subscribed to what Tonebase puts out. They're paid, behind the paywall stuff. I have no idea how to advise you in that particular aspect, but I did, and I don't always find their videos like completely helpful, but sometimes they're absolute gems. And I think this one in particular about Chopin etudes is one of those. And a lot of things, there are a lot of ways that I would recommend doing it, and let's just talk about one more. She talks about in the video about plucking. This is almost like a Pianist Academy reacts to tone bass piano. And the pluck is very similar to what actually we were talking about with Alexander earlier today. So we're playing one note and letting the key feel like it pushes us back. This is a very slow way of practicing, obviously, but probably a lot of these practice techniques combined are going to help you uncover this. If the left hand is causing the problem, for me, that would be the case. I can already feel that in a passage like this, it would be the left hand that would be holding me back. I'm right-handed. My left hand with fast passage work has just never been as good as the right hand. One of the things that I always love doing in cases like this, especially when it's the same material in both hands presented, is I make one hand my mental leader. So I will let my left hand guide the articulation, the tempo, the rhythm, and make my right hand be the follower. And there's, I've worked with a couple in-person students on this, and whether it's in person or over Zoom or something like that, it's never easy because the change is in the brain. And there's no manifestation of the difference, except for when you truly let the weak hand lead, things seem to come together much, much faster. And then you also know your limitation. So whatever the weak hand is, if that hand is setting the maximum tempo and the maximum point that we can play this, whether it's tempo, dynamic, you name it, right? Pick the weak hand, let that one lead to the point where it can be accurate, 100%. And then we need to work on building that hand. So if we identify what hand that is, we can, of course, practice both hands together at the speed that the weak hand sets and at the dynamic that the weak hand sets. But then once we know what the weak hand is, we can do a lot of hand alone practice, just that hand alone, working on specific techniques like the groupings, like repeating the notes, like the pluck idea. So that's where I would go. Especially if that's the particular passage that you're working on. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I know that you probably can't, you might not be listening if you're in class, but thanks for the question. Jim, I saw Jim. Hey, Jim, you tuned in a little bit ago. I'm sorry, I'm just getting to you now, but good to see you. Oh, okay, autumn nights are coming, so now's a good time to re-engage with piano learning during the cold evenings. That's great. That's great. I'm glad. Jim, feel free to write in if you've got a question or let us know what you're working on, anything like that. Let me just, until we get another question, I think I've answered everybody that's here so far. Yeah? I don't think I missed anybody. If I did, just let me know, because I'm trying to read through everything, and I think I've gotten to everybody. But JG, you mentioned that Chopin wished he had more strength. Yeah. He's, I don't know. He's an interesting guy. And he had, his hands were kind of on the dainty side of things. There are really mixed opinions on playing Chopin, because there's that whole argument that he was kind of a smaller man, and especially in his later years, he was kind of frail. That doesn't take away the power, that his music has, right? And I think the power that he probably played it with, especially in his younger years. And he was such a master that he could still make things very effective without having a massive amount of dynamics. Oh, JG did have another question. I'm going to go back there. So it's interesting that Chopin wrote these etudes and wrote so much music that's incredibly challenging, that really pushes the boundaries of what we're able to do at the piano. And then we also need to remember that Chopin's piano was extremely different than the modern piano. It was much lighter to play. The action was lighter. I even think, I'd have to research this again, but I think the keys on Chopin's piano were also narrower. I know for sure we had that earlier pianos, but I would have to look up the year that the modern key size was standardized. And it's right around in the late 19th century, mid to late 19th century. So I'll have to look that up, but I'm pretty sure that for a lot of the music that we play, it was composed for pianos that had lighter actions, and the keys weren't as wide. So until you get to playing stuff like Rachmaninoff and the Russian composers and who else would we have? probably some lists, some of the later list stuff. Most of the stuff that we play that's in the classical canon is going to be, it has been written for a piano that's not, it's a relative of the modern grand, but it's not the modern grand piano, which makes it very interesting to interpret and to talk about the music. But I think it's interesting that people talk about endurance. So I'm going back to this comment that was made between JG and Jose. So JG said, after Jose said, Taubman would say building endurance is an obnoxious concept. JG said, you do have to have strength and endurance for hard stuff. I would still rethink that, JG, and I would think that, let's use Chopin as an example, since you've talked about him. Chopin's, despite what he wrote in letters and what he put down, he still played, and he still could play all of his repertoire. Maybe he was unhappy with how it sounded, but he didn't stop playing for lack of strength or endurance. And what I find is the more difficult repertoire gets, difficult technique-wise, just the sheer number of notes maybe that we have to play, or the breadth of the instrument that we have to capture and reproduce sound with. That component added to maybe the length of the piece of music, right? The most virtuosic technique is a product of learning the minimum effort necessary to create the sound. And so pianists that are great pianists they're not working harder, and they haven't built, say, more strength beyond, like we talked about earlier, the strength to just sit in one place and kind of hold our arms out. Jose says, how about child prodigies playing huge works? Right, and that goes along with what's in the Kochevisky book as well, that children do have all of the strength that it takes to play the piano. It's more a matter of the coordination of it and learning how to use what we have in the most efficient way that we can. So if we find ourselves, like in the Revolutionary Etude, bearing down and like working really hard to play that, the left hand, the right hand, whatever it is, watch a great pianist playing it. Sure, it's going to look hard because their fingers are flying. But I guarantee it's not difficult for them. Difficult is we're talking about music. It's such a strange term to talk about with music, but if they've played the piece a while and they've understood it and they've performed it and they've really experienced everything that a piece or an etude has to offer and what it requires of them, and they've learned how to execute it for their body in the most efficient way possible, it's no longer difficult. It might still be difficult to execute perfectly day after day. It might be difficult to interpret perfectly day after day. Sure, that's hard. But as far as strength, that, at least from my perspective, isn't a thing the more advanced you get. Because as we continue to explore the piano, we should be always looking for ways to play more lightly, but with the same result, basically. And the greatest pianists on earth have that mastered. They can play with almost no effort, really, and they can play everything. Because they have learned the intricacies of how the whole body works and how it's all put together, and exactly all of the motions and the levers and the energy that's directed in. They've learned how to master that for their body. Sometimes those people are great teachers too, and sometimes they're really not, because everyone's body is different. And so that's why, as a teacher, I try to give different kinds of practice techniques, but there's probably going to be one or two or three that really resonate with different people. And those are going to be ones that you revisit a lot and time after time and day after day. Those are going to be the ones that make the biggest impact on what you play. And maybe the other ones make a little impact, but then you use those accordingly. You don't try to force a big impact into a technique that historically maybe hasn't done a great deal for you, right? Wave function. Thanks, JG. So Jim wrote back in, you say you're late in the game to piano in your 40s, stopped lessons during COVID and back to them 2 years later. You just struggle with practice structure and consistency. Well, Jim, what does your practice structure look like? Let us know. When you do sit down to play, what do you do? Yeah, let us know, and I'll come back to that. Let me jump back. JG had another question about Chopin Opus 9, number 1. So he asks, okay, JG. So he wrote in again. Let me respond to what you most recently said first. He says it's weird because the hands together part of the revolutionary was going really, it was better 2 weeks ago and it got worse. That is a part of the learning process. What might be happening, JG, is that you may have done the same type of practice too much. But it's actually really common as the brain is actually forming the best connections to execute a certain activity while it's building those connections. So we have the point that we're starting to learn, and then we progress. And then we have the point where the brain is actually saying, okay, like this is important for me to learn, so I'm going to build neural connections because I'm being asked to execute this combination of activities repeatedly over and over again. They must be important. And then we get to the point after that of closer to mastery, let's say, or at least to the point where things are lining up and they're working better. That point, right in the middle where we're building the connections, is a really delicate place. And if we do too much of this, only the same kind of practice, we can find that we push ourselves to that point where we start to build the connections, and then something doesn't quite get formed the right way. And the brain says, well, I've kind of got it, but we consciously have this expectation that, well, it was feeling easier, and I've been working on it, therefore it should be getting better. But what we've done is we've actually partially failed to build all of the connections, the bridge between being completely foreign and being familiar. And the best way to build that bridge and to keep it in good shape, because neural connections fade over time, the best way to keep it in shape is to practice a lot of different ways. So that's why when we talked about the revolutionary etude, that's why I gave you a whole bunch of different ways to practice it. And there are even more than that. But we shouldn't get stuck playing it one particular way. Like we shouldn't get stuck playing it hands together slowly. We're only going to form a partial connection. And we might form that partial really well, but then when we push it just the tiniest bit, it's going to break. And we're going to feel like we haven't learned it as much. And I may have mentioned this on a stream before, but I really want to mention it again. My teacher when I was in my teens, and I would come into lessons and I'd say the exact thing, and I'd say like, I practiced so hard and it's worse than it was last week when I came in for my lesson. Like, what is going on? It's not because I didn't practice. I swear I practiced. And he told me playing music is like walking a sand dune. And no matter sometimes how many steps forward we take, sometimes we're just falling backwards. And that's just part of the process. Learn to embrace that, recognize what's happening, congratulate yourself for making it so far, and then say to yourself, if we keep taking steps forward, we are going to reach the top. Now, the better our footing is on each step forward, the faster we're going to reach the top, right? And so going back to the neural connections, right? The more we build in those different types of neural connections, the faster we're going to reach the top. So there are ways to increase the progress, but that doesn't stop the fact that while the brain works and our subconscious and our conscious are very separated. So we might feel emotionally a certain way, and we might be frustrated, or we might be excited about the progress we've made, but our subconscious doesn't have any idea about that. It just says, here's A, B, and C. This is how we've practiced it, and this is what I've put together for you. And so we can't let our conscious brain, where we have those emotions, get in the way of what the subconscious is telling us, because it's really telling us you need to do some different kind of work and just keep at it because we're close. That's what I always find is when students are really close to having a breakthrough in a certain passage or with a certain difficulty, it gets much more difficult for a short period of time than it was. And then all of a sudden on a day, really, like you'll sit down at the piano and it'll be, oh my gosh, it works. And it's never been easier than this. And we need to get to that point. So that's all I'm just going to say, it's that simple. It's not that simple, of course, because we have feelings about it and it's inside. But boiling it down, it's that simple. So Jim, I'm still waiting for Jim to write back in here. Danny was asking JG how many days a week. 7 days a week. That's great. I'm very happy for you, JG. I haven't been able to practice every day of the week in a long time. I'm just happy if I can do 5 these days. Okay. Until we get another question, I'm going to go back. JG, I've been answering a lot of JG's questions. So if there's anything else that people want to hear about, just ask. I wanted to jump over to, he asked about Chopin Nocturne Opus 9, number 1. That one might be, I do have that one here in my iPad. And he asked about the rest of the piece is easy, but the repeated notes section in Opus 9, number 1. JG, if you're still around and you're on your headphones, do we have a different? Are we talking about 2 different pieces? Because I'm not seeing a repeated note section. So let me know. Oh, maybe the repeated notes in the main melody, if that's what you mean. I just didn't read your whole question. So maybe you're talking about this stuff like in bar 2. Those 4 repeated notes. I was looking for like bars and bars and bars of repeated notes. So can't get a consistently good tone. Great question. So we always want a direction, JG. We always want a direction as we're going through a phrase. And we need to have just as much idea of that direction in the phrase for the repeated notes as we do for that like opening line. That we can feel a really nice shape as we play it. And then when we get to the repeated notes, they all need to be different, just like when we play a long phrase. None of those notes are the same. Richard, I'm going to come back to that in a second. Awesome. So if we're looking for, if we're talking about like a tone of a tone color that's warm, I like to achieve that by kind of pulling the tone out of the key a little bit. So I have a very cushioned wrist, and I'm playing with the pad of the finger. And of course, in this nocturne and something like this, I would be using the una corda pedal. Maybe not all the way down, but I'd be using it somehow, partially, maybe all the way, maybe changing how far the una corda pedal is depressed. We don't want to rely on that too much using the left pedal, because that's kind of it's a way to extract even more color out of a sound, but it can prevent us from actually learning how to execute it well. Now here's an interesting thing. At least in the copy I have, and I bet this is accurate to Chopin himself, those first 3 notes are written to be played thumb, 2, 3, and then 4. Right? And we know that Chopin actually thought that each finger of the hand had its own personality, its own character. So there's a reason why we play 1, 2, 3, 4. And Chopin was a big fan of actually not trying to practice out, not trying to make all of the fingers equal, not giving them equal importance, not making them equal players in the game that we're playing when we're at the piano, right? Each finger has something that it does really well. Let's embrace what it does really well. So a lot of time, actually all the time in Chopin's music, specific fingers have specific types of tasks. So just the fact that this bar is fingered with 1, 2, 3, 4. Sure, it also moves the hand over to also play the next phrase, but that wouldn't be hard for anybody to do. If we played 3, 3, 3, 3, we can still play 5, 4, 3, 1, 2. So it's not about moving the hand, but it's about actually allowing each finger to speak using its own voice. That can be a great way of discovering different tones, is embracing that idea that Chopin had. Each finger has its own personality. Now the other idea, if you do want to practice with one finger, I would personally use a third finger to repeat. And some of the hairpin that's in that, well, that's a whole nother discussion. Because depending on the edition that you're reading, hairpins in Chopin aren't always dynamic markings. They are markings about rubato and about time. So I wouldn't necessarily encourage you to play this first bar or the first two bars with a crescendo, which is what a lot of people do. But instead, this is actually a little bit of a speed up, followed by a little bit of a pullback. It depends a little bit on the edition, so you'll have to look up exactly what you're reading. But start with, let's leave it at there for now, JG. Start with exploring different fingers and their personalities. And then if we do want to stick with one finger, think about pulling the sound out of the piano with a soft wrist, soft fingertip, on one pitch, even outside of the piece of music that you're working on. We can take this F, for example. How many different colors can you make to the tone as you repeat the note? Some of that is determined a little bit by dynamic. Experiment with all of that and see where you get to. And I hope that answered your question. Great. Okay. So I'm just going to take care of Richard's last question. It's good to see you, Richard. And then we'll call it a day. It's been a great session so far. Really, really awesome. I'm always really bad at this. I always forget, but if you give the video a like, that really helps out. It tells YouTube that things are actually going well here on the channel. So if you haven't given the video a like, please give it a thumbs up. So Richard asked if you can change the subject with an elementary question. Sure. In playing a chord, does the highest tone played define the melody? Well, Richard, at the most beginner levels, the answer is yes, it does. Most beginner music and even into early intermediate music are, early intermediate music. The top note of a chord in the right hand is going to contain the melody. Composers aren't going to write that differently. There are maybe some rare occasions in some lesson books, but it'll be really obvious, I think, that there's a melodic line somewhere else. So most of the time, yes, in playing a chord, the highest tone defines the melody. Now, the more advanced we get, that could be in a lot of different places. And hopefully the composer has shown us in the notation what the most important note is, what the melody note is, hopefully by stem direction, separating them out, or by somehow offsetting the note in a way, somehow on the page we'll know what the melody is and we'll know the most important note to bring out. At the very highest levels, just to take it even further, we can think about every single chord that we play, whether it's got the melody in it or doesn't, as having different layers of importance in pitches. So, even if we have simply an octave in the left hand, the two notes are not equal. They don't have equal importance. And at the highest levels of interpretation, we want to decide for every single note played where its importance lies on kind of a spectrum. And those aren't given in the notation at all. Let's say we've got a chord in the left hand. It's just an F chord in second inversion. Those notes, again, are not going to all be equal in importance. And it's up to us to figure out what we want to bring out. So sometimes if you listen to classical music, one of the things that can separate different types of great performances is the lines, the inner lines or the inner notes that different performers choose to bring out. And that's something really cool. That's something I always enjoy listening to. But about your question in particular, most of the time, if we're playing like a pop song or I don't know, something that's more simple, yes, the top note is going to be the melody, and especially if it leaves a chord shape and then becomes a note on its own. We want to follow, usually stepwise and small by small leaps, we can follow where the melody goes. Is it following steps up and then back down? Or is it a couple steps and a skip and back down? Is it a skip and then some steps? Things like that. If notes are wildly changing around, they're probably not the melody. So, Richard, I hope that answered your question. Guys, I wish there was a way on live streams for people to be able to send in like snapshots. I don't think you can share photos in the chat. And that would be so cool. I don't even know, maybe there's a way that we can share like Google Drive images or something like that, where we can drop in a link to Google. And then if you've got a question about something like that, or like Richard's question about a chord and where the melody is, I could definitely tell you exactly what's going on if I could see a couple examples. So I wish maybe that's a way we'll have to explore. See if we can drop in links to like Google Drive or Dropbox, something like that in the chat. And then I can just like pull it up instantly. Oh, hey, Dressing Private. I haven't seen you before. Thanks for chiming in. Would Discord... I have no idea. I have no idea how Discord works. I thought it was like a chat. Maybe that would work. I'll have to look into that. That's a great idea. Should I also stream on Discord? Oh man, I don't know how that works. I'll have to figure it out. But at least maybe if we've got like at least a Discord community going, right? Brilliant idea. Thanks for chiming in. Dressing Private. I'll have to look at that, and then I'll try to publicize it, at least in the descriptions here on YouTube. I'll put together a Discord group or community or something. That would be that awesome. Thank you so much. And Danny, no, I don't need a refill on my coffee. It's actually a black coffee. If it was a latte, this would have been gone in the first 20 minutes, and then I wouldn't have any continued caffeine drip. So, as always, thank you everybody for joining in. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear from you, Dressing. Can I just call you Dressing? Join in more often. Yeah, say hi and come back in 2 weeks. We have these every 2 weeks, and drop a question in. For those of you that weren't here right at the top of the hour or hour and a half, just about that we talked, go back and revisit it. I talked a bit about a new project that I'm working on, or that's almost done actually, and it's a big online course that I'm going to be releasing in the next couple weeks. So I don't need to go all into that again. But if you're here now, I took about 3 minutes at the beginning of the video and explained kind of what's going on with that. So it would be great if you went and checked that out. And I saw a couple of you added your likes to the video. Thank you so much. I need to remember to ask people that like every 15 minutes, because it really does help the algorithm, and it tells YouTube that people are actually enjoying what's happening on the live stream, and then tells more people about it. So great. Anyway, this has been a great session. Thank you all for being here. And if you've got questions in the meantime, the best place to leave them is in the comments below this video, or actually any of the live stream videos. I'll always go back and I'll compile questions. And if they come in the meantime, in between this one and the next one, I'll try to answer them first thing next time. So don't feel like you even have to wait to ask for 2 weeks, or that if you might forget something that you want to ask, just drop it in a comment. And that'd be great. Okay. Thank you again. And this Saturday, we've got a new masterclass coming out on Debussy's Reverie. So look forward to that. And thanks, Danny. Good to see you. Thanks, everybody, for joining in. I always end with practice smarter, not harder. And I feel like we talked about a lot of that today. So, all right, until next time, I'll see you.